Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Highland Park Public Library, we would like to welcome you to Library in Your Living Room. We are pleased to present Shelf Isolation, a weekly mini-series about what to read, watch, and play next. I am Catherine, and this is your Information and Reader Services Department.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle, and I just wanted to talk to you about a book that I read this week. The book is called You've Been Volunteered. It is a book by Laurie Gelman, and it's the second book in the Class Mom series, which I believe I talked about earlier in Shelf Isolation. But if you don't remember, Class Mom is a novel about a woman named Jen Dixon who becomes the class mom for her son's kindergarten class and all of the drama that comes with it. It's really fun. In this book, her son is now in 3rd grade and she's once again the class mom, but she's also been volunteered to be part of the safety committee. So of course, more drama. This is just a really fun series. You definitely don't have to be a mom to love this series. I am not, and it's just really funny and well written and just a blast. And I really loved it, and I'm actually hoping that she writes another one in the series because, you know, it's just a lot of fun. And that's everything that I'm going to talk about today. Thank you.
Hello. All right. So I have a few books that I'm going to talk about. The first one is a cookbook. It's called Snacking Cakes. And anyway, yesterday I made an oatmeal. It was supposed to be an oatmeal chocolate chip cake, but Todd doesn't like chocolate. So I made it with blueberries and walnuts instead. And it was really good. It's perfect if you want something small for just 2 people. So it was very delicious. And then we decided, after forcing Todd to watch a number of Cake Wars and those types of shows, we got interested in making a chocolate peppermint cake. Well, they happen to have a really good chocolate cake in here. So we decided to make it 2 layers. So I made a layer and he made a layer. And I'll just say that mine did not overflow in the oven. We'll leave that person unmentioned who that happened to. But keep in mind, it was a chocolate cake, even though he doesn't like chocolate. So the chocolate cake turned out really, really good. We did a peppermint ganache along with then a chocolate fluffy frosting, which was also in this book. I highly recommend it, 2 for 2, and they were excellent. So now I'm going to move on to, after cake, to murder. The first book I read was Snow by John Banville. And when I started reading the book, I kind of agreed with the main character, whose name is Detective Inspector St. John Stratford. The book, you kind of feel like you're in a Clue game a bit. It's set in Ireland in the 1950s, and it's at a manor house. And the main character, he gets called to, there's been a murder at this home. And so when he walks in, he immediately says, I feel like I'm in some type of mystery novel, because the book opens with the body is in the library. And the person who makes that statement is the Colonel, not Colonel Mustard. This is Colonel Osborne, who is the person who lives at Valley House. So the story again is set in 1950 rural Ireland. There's a horrible, horrible snowstorm that's taking place. And when he goes in, the murder victim is a social climbing priest. It's a Protestant house. The priest he keeps his horses at Valley House and stuff, and he is dead in the library, and it's a pretty gruesome murder. And so it ends up that the detective inspector has to try to piece together these things of what has taken place. And unfortunately, a lot has taken place before he gets there. Somebody has cleaned up the blood. Somebody has made the priest a bit more acceptable with his cloak and things. So a lot of things have been moved, and so trying to find clues, basically they can't find anything. So it kind of goes back and forth. So he's out in the countryside, then he's back in the manor house trying to solve the mystery. And the really interesting thing about it is that the descriptions of like the home, the landscape, and basically what Ireland was like in the 1950s, it's excellent. The story moves along pretty slow, and I found that I had to kind of keep going back, like, wait, what happened here? But then, I mean, it ties in nicely. Most of the characters, they're really not likable in the book, with the exception of the inspector. They're just like, they all have issues. None of them like each other, and you don't really like them. So, but overall, I do recommend that. It is a good book. It plods along, and it has a pretty interesting ending. The other interesting thing about Banville is this is the first time he has written other mysteries, but this is the first mystery that he's actually written using his name. He usually goes by the name of Benjamin Black. That's his series that are also set in Ireland. So that one was really good. And then the next one I read, another murder, was about Wintergrave. It's the second in the series. I think I told you about it earlier, by Helen Tursten. It's set in Sweden, and it's following the detective inspector Imbla Nystrom and her team. There are three individuals who they get called in when the local police need assistance with solving crimes. So the story, Imbla and her team have split up because of funding and stuff in Sweden, so they're all kind of scattered around, but they end up getting back together again because there's the disappearance of two children, and then a young man who is on the spectrum for autism, who's been brutally beaten in this small town of Stromstad. So they're called in to try to figure out, to find the kids, because no one else, there are no clues. They've just like basically disappeared within 6 weeks of each other. One is a 9-year-old girl, and the other is a 6-year-old little boy. So the book, it's perfect police procedure, following things. It's really neat how they put it together. It has a really brisk pace. I'd say it takes you just a couple days to read it. You really can't put it down. There's lots of twists and turns, not only with solving the crime, but also with the three members of the team. You find out a bit more about each of them, their background and stuff, and then some interesting things happen to them while they're in this small town. And then it's basically they put the puzzle together and then they solve it. And I think what I took away from the story is it kind of goes, again, the word plod, because it kind of just goes back and forth. You're kind of like, come on, is this really necessary to tell you? But then the last like 2 chapters, I mean, you're just like, oh my gosh, with everything that's happening. So this is book 2. There's a third book that's out that just came out. I have a hold on that one, so I'm sure I will talk to you about that murder later. But anyway, I highly recommend that one. And then I have one more. So I was busy. This one is actually not a murder. It's the love story of Misty Carmichael by Beth Morrey. And if you're a fan of Eleanor Oliphant or The Curious Charms of Arthur Pepper or anything by Bachman, you're going to love this book. The main character is Misty Carmichael, and she's 79 years old. She's a mother, a grandmother, and a wife, but whose world has basically not turned out the way that she had hoped it would. Her son and grandson and his wife have moved to Australia. She's had a falling out with her daughter, and the love of her life, her husband, is no longer in the picture. So she usually just putters around her house, does a lot of cleaning. I can see her probably with a vacuuming a lot, and drinking sherry. And so she usually doesn't do anything else, but she wants to send an email that's interesting to her son and grandson in Australia. So she happens to notice in the paper that at the local park that they're going to be basically electrocuting fish to stun them to move them to a cleaner pond. So she decides to go. And so she goes to this, and she's standing there and stuff, and there's a nice lady that's handing out baked goods that she's made, and there's all these people and stuff. And so she's kind of watching what's happening. And the next thing she knows, she's feeling kind of faint, and she actually faints. And when she wakes up, there's all these kind people in the park who are helping her and stuff. And this kind of helps her, kind of come out of her shell, because she kind of finds like these people are really, really nice, and that maybe, it's a good idea to get out. And so these characters become a part of her life, and you see like a whole new Misty Carmichael emerging. But then you also learn about her past, like she was a librarian, and she gave up everything to raise her children. Her husband was a very famous author of historical books, and so she was always kind of like running the house and things, and he was out succeeding and getting, on trips and stuff, and she was always home. So anyway, the nice thing about the book is that this chance encounter has helped her to see a world outside of her house, and she begins to seek out these friends. And the other nice thing is she ends up caring for a dog whose name is Bob. And it's a really enjoyable, uplifting book. It makes you laugh. There's some sad parts, but I highly recommend it. It was really an enjoyable book. And that's all I have for you this week.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gus, and I've been in the mood for, I don't know why, I get in my moods. I've been in the mood to read a classic. I haven't read a classic in a while, and I was going back and forth between John Steinbeck or Charles Dickens. In the end, Charles Dickens has won because I'm reading one of my favorite, it's a reread actually, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I don't know exactly when it came out, but I want to say 1800 sometimes, or 1900, early 1900s. But for those of you that have not read it, it is about a boy named Philip Pirrip, I think that was his name. And he falls in love with a girl. It's essentially a love story. He falls in love with this one girl named Stella, and she is raised by one of the meanest ladies in the world, Miss Havisham. So I don't want to run it, but it's a really good book. And I also highly recommend the movie. And I don't usually recommend the movies. The book is better, obviously. But this, the movie that came out in 1946, directed by David Lean, it's a really good adaptation, and I highly recommend the movie as well. But obviously, read the book first and then watch this movie. They also did a remake, I think, with Gwyneth Paltrow and Ethan Hawke. I saw that. I guess it was okay. It's not my cup of tea. It was okay. So, but I really recommend the older movie. And lastly, I also, in my spare few minutes per day, well, per week, I might have a few minutes to spare, but I have been playing, the latest game I've been playing is called Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and that's for the PlayStation 5. I picked this up for a good price, so it is on sale, but you can't beat the library's price because it's free. So we do have it at the library, and it's a really good action adventure game. It is rated M. So Stephanie, Karen, everybody here, be careful. It's rated M. So you want to watch out for that. I believe that's 18 and up or something, because it's very violent, but it is a Viking type violence. So I don't know. I'm into that, that stuff. So with that, that's pretty much what I've been doing this week. And that's it. Thank you.
I'm Karen, and this week I'm going to talk about 2 knitting books, but they're very unusual knitting books, so it might be more interesting than you think. The first one is called The Power of Knitting, and I just want to show you this bright pink cover that kept standing out from the library shelf until I had to pick it up. It's by an Italian economist named Loretta Napoleoni. And she has written a lot of other books, all nonfiction, about things like global financing, terrorism, social change. And by profession, she's an economist. She has a PhD in economics. And she's Italian, but she writes in English. And she's been, I think she worked for the City of London for a long time. So she's very good writer in English, it turns out. And also a lifelong knitter. But this is not a typical knitting book that's full of techniques and patterns and photographs of garments on models, but it's full of her stories, and it's kind of hard to classify. But there are a lot of personal stories. She wrote this when she was going through a personal crisis. She talks about her husband having gotten the family into this financial trouble, but she doesn't really explain exactly what the nature of it was. But I think the best parts were when she talked about her personal history, her grandmother who taught her to knit, and she talks about these chance meetings with people on public transportation, you know, who she'll converse with, and it'll turn out they have a connection through knitting or through wool or something, you know, that they both share. So anyhow, some of the stories have a way of connecting to economics, and which is interesting. You know, that's her main job, so it makes sense. But she talks about knitting co-ops in Alaska and a lot of historical things that I didn't know. And I found it really interesting to read the thoughts of somebody who doesn't usually write about this subject, doesn't normally write personal stories at all. But it's interesting because at the very end, I found there's a bibliography and there were notes. So she actually did some research, and she's got some citations to the things she read and, you know, consulted for the book. So anyway, not really, let's see, not really necessarily for a knitter, but just somebody who might be interested in knitting, crafts, economics, politics. So that's The Power of Knitting. And my second book is called Knitting Comfortably. And about an hour ago, I found out how to pronounce the author's last name, which I had not thought about. But these days you can go onto the web and find video blogs and interviews with these people. And his first name is Carson, last name is Demers. And this is a new arrival at Highland Park, although it's not a brand new book. It's owned by a few other libraries in our consortium, and it's been very popular. I found out through word of mouth that it even existed. I think it's from an independent publisher, so it wasn't reviewed, but I just want to show you the cover. If you can see the knitting hands at the top, but down here, there is a hand on a mouse. And at the other side, there's a cross section of a person sitting, you know, like a hip bone. So it's a lot about ergonomics and a lot about preventing injury. And it's a lot about, you know, if you sit at a desk at all, whatever you do at the desk, whether you use a computer, whether you write or knit, scrapbook, anything, I think you can get something out of this, because he gives a lot of advice about preventing injuries, how to sit, you know, postures, how to break bad habits. And it's almost like a textbook. And I have checked it out several times from other libraries and only gotten partway through, probably halfway through, but it's a lot to digest at once. But it's a very, very useful book, I think. And here again, there are no patterns, you know, just as in The Power of Knitting, there are no patterns, but every chapter he will give like an assignment that proves what he's been demonstrating. You know, try this and see if it doesn't work for you, and that sort of thing. So little knitting assignments you can do. So anyway, yeah, it's good in small doses, but I recommend it for almost any sedentary worker, whether you're a knitter or not. And next time, I think I will probably be getting back to the usual international detectives that I tend to read, or maybe a cookbook. So anyway, thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. It's Catherine again. The book I have to share tonight is a political biography, which is a little bit different for me, but it's Pelosi by Molly Ball. And this book came out, I think, last year, and I was just interested in it because Nancy Pelosi is, of course, in the news all the time, and I know the job that she does in the House, but I didn't really know all that much about her. I realized she's been serving for so long that I had very little idea of what she did before that. So this was really just the right kind of book for me, and that, you know, sometimes if a historian writes a book, you know, they want to include every single fact that they dug up. And this is not that book. This was written by a journalist. It's a much more breezy, high-level account. It includes some personal facts, but doesn't go too in-depth into that either. Mostly it's just his career, or her career. But one of the fun facts that I learned is that when Nancy Pelosi was raising her 5 children, she did not have a nanny, even though the family probably could have afforded it. And the reason for that was that nobody wanted to be a nanny to a family with 5 children, when they could probably find a job with a family that had only 2 children, or maybe even 1 child. So Nancy Pelosi, raised all the kids without the help of a nanny. So I just kind of enjoyed that detail. The book isn't too long, it's about 350 pages. I listened to it on audiobook and I thought the reader was good. It really was just a nice companion for listening to a book while I was, driving around, exercising, whatever. It was engaging, it was interesting and informative, but like I said, not too dry, not, a whole laundry list just of, facts on what so-and-so said and then what so-and-so said. The one thing I would say is that the book does talk about some of Nancy Pelosi's failures, but is not highly critical. If you are a person who just hates Nancy Pelosi, this is probably not the book for you. It is geared more toward people who are her supporters than people who are her detractors. So just know that going in, so that you're not just torturing yourself with a book about somebody you don't like. So that is the book that I have to share tonight. So I'll see you next week.
Okay, so a couple weeks ago, I was looking for something else, and I fell across a citation in the diary of Jessie Lo Smith, who was a local principal and superintendent, that on 100 years ago, January 22nd, 1921, the board voted to appoint a new librarian, Elizabeth Wales. And I thought, well, that's kind of funny. And I posted on the staff chat site, Yammer, and Will came back with a question, and how many librarians were there in 1921? Well, I don't know. So I investigated, and it just so happens in our library, we have a couple copies of what I think was a master's thesis on the history of Highland Park. I decided to see, okay, so what happened? So it does turn out in January 1921, there were two librarians, Ms. Wales and an assistant librarian. And later that year, they also hired someone to help clean up and dust a little bit. I don't know who was doing that before, but very late in the year, they hired someone else to help with the custodial work. And it was kind of funny. According to this book, the library shared a vacuum cleaning with Trinity Church across the street to save money. And also that year, there was something of a crisis in the funding in Highland Park Library. And so there was a very public appeal in the newspapers and to people to donate so they didn't have to get the money otherwise. And also in December, there was something of an uncomfortable meeting because the library felt that Ms. Walls was purchasing and selecting unwholesome books for the youth of Highland Park. And not surprisingly, by February, both Ms. Walls and her assistant librarian had gone on to other jobs. So that was kind of interesting. And then of course I became more curious and I thought, well, who was this Ms. Walls? And she was born in 1870 in Massachusetts, and right before they took the census. So she comes out as Bessie, and she seems to spend a long career as a librarian. I found traces of her at Quincy Public Library at the turn of the century. She went, according to Kalamazoo's public library site, she was there in 21 to help them update their selection of books, maybe a different theory about what kind of books libraries wanted to offer. And she died in Chicago in 1937. So it's kind of a history of a former librarian in Highland Park. And if you're interested in other histories about the library, the Highland Park Public Library, I'm going to share my screen for just a minute. If you are not aware, the original building that came down in the 1920s was, now I can't see this, was funded by Carnegie. There you can see the old WYCA2 next to it. It was a doctor's home at the time. And it was another one of our collections, in addition to these fine images we have on the Illinois Digital Archives. The Women's Club, the local Highland Park Women's Club, pestered Mr. Carnegie until he donated money to build this library, which was replaced in 1930, where we are now. And then the addition is where this old house was that was a YWCA for so long. And so I'm kind of sharing too, I have a link to the Women's Club, this letter of proclamation from the city clerk in 1905, thanking the Women's Club for obtaining the land. Now, Mr. Carnegie, I think I have talked about both Finney, who was a Civil War veteran, and the Women's Club in the library before, but it's interesting because Carnegie initially said flat out no to the Highland Park Women's Club because this is a wealthy community, and he was very invested in influencing other communities. However, they persisted, and he was being kind of like polite, no, I can't do it unless you do this, I can't do it unless you do that. And every time he said, I can't do it unless these women in Highland Park, the Women's Club, answered the call. This is their First Minutes book, which is also online. And ultimately they had land donated with the caveat that this land where the Highland Park Library sits right now always be used as a library. And so there you have it. That's your library. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Laurie. Today I have only one book to talk about, and it is Gods of the Upper Ear by Charles King. Can't see his last name because it's under the barcode, but his last name is King. And it is a book about a nonfiction book, and it is basically about how anthropology became a modern social science, and how it really changed in the early and through the 20th century, how it really changed the way we thought about the world and the people that live in it. It centers around a man named Franz Boas, B-O-A-S, who is a Columbia University professor, and many of his students, who included Margaret Mead and Zora Neale Hurston, and others. And it's really quite good. At first, when I picked it up, I thought, you know what, there's a lot of type in here, and it looks too, it's just too much for me. But it really is a very interesting window into the way we see things, and how what are considered the way things are, how that changes over time. Like how science changes, and how like our ways of thought and the things we accept as fact, how they change. So I am enjoying reading it, and I hope you'll pick it up too. Also, I wanted to point out that our book discussions run by Judy Levin, they're going to be discussing this book on Tuesday. Let me just see, I forgot. Tuesday, February 9th at 1 o'clock. So if you get a chance, I know there's copies still on the shelf. Read the book, or just join the discussion, and you'll learn something interesting. And that's all I have to say today. So thank you.
Well, that is it for today, folks. As always, please remember that we are all here for you. We are available for comments, questions, or concerns that you may have. Visit our website at hplibrary.org to find the various ways to contact us. Because the library's hours and services can change suddenly due to COVID, it is best to contact us via email or chat on our website before coming to the library. Our music today was Carefree by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information about this and the titles we mentioned in our show notes below. Okay, everybody, this is us signing off. Until we see you next, stay safe.